Right, we'll just get started. So, hi everyone, welcome to this webinar. We're going to be looking at simplifying teamwork using Microsoft Teams within Project Planner. Now, Project Planner did used to be called Project for the Web, so if you are familiar with that term, they are interchangeable. I have been working on Project for the Web for a while, so if I do call it that, I do apologise. So, today, it's me and my colleague Greg, so we'll just introduce ourselves. So I'm Jake Whitehouse, I'm an MWM consultant, so I work in the modern work management team. My specialty is around PPM, projects for the web, planner. Done a fair bit on Project Online, Power BI, and Power Automate. I'll hand over to my colleague Greg, and he can introduce himself now.
Hi, lovely to meet you all. So I'm Greg Hanson. I'm the commercial sales lead at CPS. I've been with CPS for just under a year. However, I've got close to a decade in IT sales and account management. But yeah, just supporting Jake on this call and great to have you guys with us.
Right, so just a little bit about CPS. So we are a Microsoft Gold partner. We are a Microsoft Advanced Specialization partner. We have the Fast Track Award, as well as a 5 times Microsoft MVP. We have a fair few ISO accreditations and the PPM accreditations as well as being a great place to work. So, on today's agenda, as I mentioned at the start, I'm going to look at basically improving sort of workflows within Power Automate, within Planner. Sorry. So we're going to be looking at just general sort of terminology because again, the terms do change and they have changed relatively recently. So just to prevent any sort of confusion. Then we're going to look at the out-the-box sort of functionality that you do have available within Planner, as well as potential automation that you can add. So there's 3 separate sort of scenarios. One, a approval request process. One, creating teams automatically within a project. And then one, creating and linking up a schedule to a calendar. And then finally, just a Q&A if there are any questions, as well as the next steps. So first of all, general terminology, it is quite boring, but it can get confusing sometimes. So I'm sure everyone is familiar with Microsoft Teams, considering we are on Teams. However, the main point of note is the difference between a team and a group. Now, within Microsoft Teams, a team obviously is a collection of people, and you can use a team to basically store files, post comments within a sort of channel, whereas a group is essentially the back-end side of the team that stores all of those users. There are essentially 2 groups, an Office group and a security group. Now, an Office group essentially works with Office 365, so Microsoft Teams in this particular instance. So if you have a all-company team, that will have an all-company group assigned to it in the back. A security group is slightly different, but essentially within Active Directory, which is now called Entra, you can essentially have similar to an Office group, a collection of people, but you can assign things like licenses, security roles, permissions onto that group, and everyone who's added in gets given a license or a security role. Now, they are slightly different. So just think of a security group more for permissions and an Office group more for things like Teams and SharePoint. Now, projects, as I mentioned before, they have, or Microsoft are going through a general renaming process where a lot of terms called projects are being called plans. As I mentioned, they are changing Project for the Web to Planner, and they're essentially merging some of their products together. So I believe it's Planner, Project for the Web, and To Do are all joining into one sort of software. And finally, just onto Power Automate. So Power Automate essentially is just a software that lets you create automated workflows. It's very straightforward. It can link in with quite a number of products off the bat, and then things that it can't link to by default, you can create API connections. So essentially, you can connect to 90% of things as long as you're able to get an API to Power Automate. And a Power Automate flow is the actual workflow itself. So what is the actual automation going on? Right. So in terms of out-of-the-box functionality within Planner, you are able to create and assign a Microsoft team onto a project. Now, it's a very useful piece of functionality. What it can do is essentially you can either create an existing team or you can create a group from scratch, and then that will essentially add people into a project. It gives them permissions, it gives them access to any of the files, and it just makes your life a lot easier rather than having to manually share it out with people. Now, the way that this works, if I go into Project for the Web here, I open up my projects area, now called Plans. If I go into one of these projects and go into the schedule, within my schedule, at the top right, the called group members. Now, within here, let me find one that actually doesn't have a group created. Alternatively, let me just create one. Test one. I'll go into my schedule now. If you don't have a group associated onto a plan, what will happen is in this group members button, it will give you two options: create a group or add to a group. Now, if you do have existing ones, if you don't want to be creating, extra mess in the background, you can just go into here and find an existing group. Whenever you make the Microsoft team, it will make a group. So if you do have teams that you want to add into this, you can just select them. So say if I wanted to add global IT rollout, everyone who works on that project, I can add them into this project as well. Alternatively, I can click on this create group. Now, if I just add in the account I'm working on, which actually I won't have to, if I click create, what that will do then is that will create this as a group. And whenever I try and assign someone who's outside of the group into a task, I'll get a pop-up saying add this person to the plan. Now you can either assign them onto the plan or assign them onto the group. 9 times out of 10, I'd recommend saying add them to the group as well, because then they have access to everything on the project. What you can do from here, just to the right of the group members, there is a 3 little dots and a button saying team files. You click onto this. As I mentioned before, what this does is this essentially creates a group. And if I zoom in so you can see, from here, this creates a SharePoint site. And within the SharePoint site, I can click this add real-time chat button just in the bottom left, and that will then start creating a Microsoft team for me. Now, all I have to do is click continue, and click add teams, and then after about 30 seconds or so, that will create a Microsoft team. So it's relatively straightforward. There are some quite nice things that you can do with this. For instance, if you do have existing sort of templates and formats that you have for a team, you can just add this in, and then that will seed a team with, say, general documents you might have. But I'll leave that to do its thing. In the meantime, we've got our team here. Now, in terms of out-of-the-box functionality, that's kind of the main bit at the moment. They are developing a few extra functions, but there isn't really too much there. So what we end up doing is we end up doing a lot of automation, which brings me on to the next point. What can you do? So within our first scenario, I'll just cover requesting approval. So essentially what we can do is we can have approval processes. Now, what that can look like is you press a button that sends an email off to an approver. The approver gets a multi-option, either email or Teams notification, yes, no, approve and reject. If they click approve, that will then start the process of creating a project, or this can be used for things like, say, business case approval, project initiation document, basically anything that has sort of a gate or a process on it that requires someone to approve it. And what that may look like, if I go into my project requests, rather than me blocking our system with my awfully named requests, what I'll do is I'll just use one that I created earlier, and this one's just called test. And what we have at the top is a button for submit approval. Now, what this will do is this will send an email off to the sponsor. I add in sponsor, then click this submit for approval, get a little notification saying, are you sure you want to send it? Click OK, get a request at the top. Now, as I mentioned, you'll either get a email or a Teams notification. So if I open up the Teams within this account, I have a little card here that's just an approver. It says, project request approval. Here's a load of information associated to the request. Here's a link to the record itself. Do you approve or reject? There are bits you can do with saying, fill in these comments, give it a reason as to why it should be approved or rejected, and then that will populate a request itself. If you do use an email, the way that looks is very similar, but just in an email format. Again, approve or reject. If I just click approve, that will then send me a notification again via email and Teams, basically saying this request is now approved. Now, it's really useful if you do have things like project request approvals, anything that is related to an approval or needs an approver, because essentially it forces users to then send off a request and have it approved. You know, if there's a reason for it to be rejected, you can have a log of why it's rejected. And what you can then do within your instance of Project for the Web is you can have, say, certain views where that record will then sit, whether it's rejected or approved, it will sit there, and you can have a log of those reasons as to why it hasn't worked. So it's really can be a really useful sort of feature. Next scenario, which leads on from what we just looked at, is creating a team within a project. So this essentially is the process that we covered earlier with the out-of-the-box functionality. This essentially automates this for you. Now, what you can do is you can have it that when a project is created or when a project comes through from a pipeline or from a request or from an approval, it will create a Microsoft team. That team can then be preceded with a document structure. It can add 10 or 20 people who you might need within that team. It can give them certain permissions as well as certain rights within things like Power BI. Essentially, it takes away all of these sort of boring admin stuff that takes 20, 30 minutes of your day each time you go to set up a project. What you can also do instead of creating a team is you can have it so it creates a channel. So one of the scenarios that we have encountered quite often recently is that companies end up having problems with a lot of teams just clogging up the system. So rather than creating a team for a project, you can have a team, a channel per project instead, and then just have one overarching program team, and then all those channels just sit within that program. What this is really good for is basically getting around a lot of restrictions with creating teams. It gets rid of the sort of process of having a limit of, I think it's 250. And what it does is, as I say, it lets you get around that because you can have service accounts that have, a considerably higher limit. So if I go back into Project for the Web, I'll go into Plans. Within Plans, because I've just approved a request, I scroll to the bottom. I have my test project here. I go onto this and go into Schedule. What this will do automatically whenever it's created is this will populate a schedule with an existing plan. So all of this is already created for me, as well as automatically creating that team. It will fill it in with the user who submitted the actual request. Now, if I want access into this, I just add in my account, CPS, develop demos, and then that takes probably about a minute or so for that to actually pull through. But you'll get a notification in the end that will basically say something along the lines of, you have now been added to a Microsoft team, and it will be called test team in this instance. You will then have access into the project, you'll have access into the team's files. It gives you a nice area basically just to store everything related to a project. The third sort of scenario, which again kind of leads on from this one, is linking in a calendar to linking up a calendar to a schedule. So what this is really useful for is if you do have some of these summary tasks or key milestones, sprint retrospectives, things like that, you can essentially, whenever a project is created, make Outlook events that are called these sort of summaries. It's quite nice, it links everything in. So what essentially ends up happening is project is created. Whenever that's created, add these events in to my calendar. Now, if I go back, I go onto my email here. I go into my calendar. As you can see, just go to those. As you can see, that has created all of these tasks now. So I can essentially populate these with the start and end dates of when tasks are going to be. Now, there's a lot you can do with this, with things like adding multiple users onto this, adding certain users into this, choosing specific tasks, specific stage gates. Now, say if a task reaches a point where it gets to important priority, anything that's important creates an event. And when that event is added, essentially anyone who's added into that event has to join a meeting. So it can add some quite nice processes into your Outlook calendar. Now, also as waiting for that, as you can see, that has now added me into my Microsoft team. So I'm now within this test team. And again, if there's anything that you pre-populate a team with, for instance, project documents, you can just have those sitting within there whenever a project is initiated. Now, what all of this can do is this can link in a lot with Project for the Web and any other systems. For instance, say if you have documents that you create every single project, or if you have business life cycles that you've got to follow, you can link any of these into basically any of those flows, and they work really well, whether that's stage gate approval, whether that's creating an Outlook event, or whether that's initiating a project. There's also things that you can do with, say, some of these word templates along top. So whenever a PID needs to be created, you click a button that automatically generates a PID based off of your requirements. That will then save automatically within your team's shared area. So again, it just takes that manual process away, where you don't want to be sitting there spending an hour writing up a business case or a PID. You can just press a button, it creates it automatically based off of information that's in the system, and then it will save it within a shared area. You can then have it say post a channel notification or send an email to the project sponsor. So there is a lot that you can do with a lot of these sort of automatic processes that can really save you a lot of time and hassle. So I'll just hand over to my colleague Greg, and he can go over the sort of next steps area.
Yeah, thank you, Jake. So this slide just outlines, I guess, the next steps and how you can engage with us. I guess just to reiterate, we're a preferred Microsoft partner. As you can see here, 1995, we've been established for over 30 years now, having celebrated our birthday, I think, a couple of weeks ago. But with over 750 successful engagements, we are excellent to understand customer inquiries and helping them out. I think if you like what you've seen today, please reach out to us. We'd love to offer you a free 45-minute session as kind of form of pre-sales. Whether you've already got something like this set up and need help enhancing it, or are using the tool and wonder how this can enhance your existing operations, just please let us know. Reach out, either email or call us.
Thank you all for attending. If anyone does have any questions, feel free. Otherwise, you're more than welcome to drop off.
Question from me, Nikki from AHDB.
Sorry, you're a little bit quiet. Are you able to get closer to your mic at all?
My bike couldn't be any closer to my
Right,
I'd have to put it in my mouth. Sorry, I've got problems with my PC at the moment. There are so many tools out there, particularly just across the Microsoft suite. And we're running a project at the moment where we've got this problem that lots of different teams want to collaborate in slightly different ways, but what we'd like to do is have a preferred way for them to do it within the business, so that no matter what project you're part of or what event or whatever it might be, that you're working in the same way all the time, rather than oh, I'm doing this for someone and they're using Microsoft Project, oh, these people are using Microsoft Loop, or these people are just using the spreadsheet. So we're trying to kind of unify that. I just wondered if you've got any view on what tools are perhaps more appropriate or more adaptable, because we've got like an events team, we've got an exporting team who manage people remotely in different countries. There's lots of different elements that we're trying to shoehorn into something. And I just wondered, because I know that you're big Microsoft people, and we are as well. Everything we do is Microsoft. So we want it to integrate. I just wondered if you've got any views on that. I know we're here talking about Planner, but
yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah, it's always a tough one, because what I've found whenever I've worked with customers is there's sort of two ways that it goes. You create a system and it goes down well, everyone adopts it, you shoehorned into processes, and there's a few complaints here and there, general stuff. We've always used Excel, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that, but that's the shoehorn process. You want everything the same. And the other way is there's a load of restrictions, people don't like it, and the adoption doesn't go well. Now, the main issue with the second problem the second issue. It's more of how you approach adoption within your organisation, because
Absolutely, I get that. I'm the digital strategy and transformation manager, so I'm
right,
I'm delivering at that sharp end a lot of the time. Where I'm making sure that we're getting people on board. So we have literally just started this process, and we've had a problem statement workshop yesterday with the key stakeholders that have said that this is their problem. So we're not jumping to solutions. There are obvious solutions out there. What we're trying to do is make sure that we cover those areas pretty broadly, and provide them with something that is exactly what you said, that first option. We're always going to get people that want to use spreadsheets or Loop or whatever it is that they're used to. What we're trying to establish is a solution that really provides value for 90% of users, because then we can get that big adoption. We talked yesterday about how it would be inconceivable now that you logged in to your PC at work and you didn't log into Microsoft Outlook and you didn't log into Microsoft Teams, and yet Teams, particularly, 5 years ago, I'd got it, never really used it, either rang somebody, so that's the kind of adoption we're attempting, obviously on a much smaller scale. This is only our company, but I just wonder whether it's, what I don't want to do is get caught up on one particular tool.
yeah,
But what I'd perhaps like to do is maybe book some extra time in to sit and talk to you about the variety of Microsoft tools and the kind of the pros and cons around those.
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
perfectly fine. One thing I will just say, with this sort of planner as well, is it does almost take that approach, because what Microsoft found with when they did projects and projects online was they shoehorned people very much into a process they weren't used to, because I believe that came out 2008, and it's when a lot of these sort of, IT was still very much a case of, it wasn't everywhere like it is now. So they've adopted an approach now where it does have base integration with things, say, like Excel. So say if you have a list of projects, let's say, what you can do off the bat is, where is the button gone? Two mouse like that.
Start to pull all that in so that even the front end isn't quite as such heavy lifting, I guess.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm losing my voice a little bit as well, which isn't
That's
helpful with
fine.
my microphone issues.
But say if I have users that are used to Microsoft Excel and they want to edit projects, rather than just saying, right, you're not used to it, that's perfectly fine. What you can do is you can press this button and you get a spreadsheet view. And then whenever I start making changes to this, that will then add it into the actual
Brilliant.
table
Yeah, so
itself.
you kind of ease people in a little bit without too much.
Mm.
Oh my God, that looks so different. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah,
what we tend to find as well is that when people go through this process, they add their information in, and it finds that, again, there's two parts of it. There's the information coming in and the information coming out. So the information coming in, you can absolutely limit people on what they do. So for an approval test for a name, sorry, not an approval test, for a name, you're limited in terms of what you can put. 100 characters. It has to be this. It has to be that. But then you have the information coming out, where we typically suggest a sort of Power BI report, where you can then link that in with multiple, pieces of software like Excel, projects online, bits like that, before you've moved into one product. And then you can have nice reports based off of that.
Exactly. And we're using quite a lot of Microsoft, I think, but it's little things like this. Teams have gone off in, excuse me, in one direction. And now it's how do we bring them all back together with something that's comprehensive, that does the heavy lifting, particularly for the big projects that we run. For the big teams like events, they have international events that they're setting up. So it's that task management that they're looking for, as opposed to project management. But yeah, I'd really appreciate perhaps someone dropping me an email. I'm guessing you've got my email address just from me being here. This is the magic of IT. I'd really appreciate someone dropping me some times that we could get together. As I say, what I really want to explore, and there'll be a couple of people from my team that I want to bring to that meeting. But what I'd like to really explore is not just one thing, but what are our options in Microsoft? You know, because you're those partners, and I kind of want some of your brain power, I suppose, to open our eyes to some of the possibilities.
Yeah. So typically, what we end up doing in these pre-sales calls is we do go through multiple options. We don't just say you have to have this. We do say so. There's this.
And if
We to give a general recommendation as well, just saying this is arguably better.
I've got a meeting tomorrow where we're pulling together our problem statement workshops. So we're kind of summarising those and looking at what's come out of those workshops earlier this week. So if somebody drops me an email, what I can then do is give you a little bit more of a, these are what we're looking for. These are the essential problems that we're trying to solve that might help you kind of focus down a little bit on what it might have been that you can help us with.
Yeah.
That's
all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've taken up loads of your time.
No, it's fine. It's not a problem. It's not a problem.
Fabulous. I look forward to hearing from you. All right.
Lovely.
Okay.
Lovely to meet you.
Thank you
Thanks
very much. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye. Sorry, I'll go in a minute. I can't find my mouse. I had to switch one of my big screens off, and now I don't know where my mouse is gone. There we go.